In rural Mississippi, Billy Ray Cobb and Pete Willard, two white men with racist ideologies, encounter Tanya Haley, a 10-year-old black girl. They subject her to a brutal and violent rape, leaving her beaten and bruised. They then attempt to hang her and eventually dump her in a nearby river to die. But she survives. The men are subsequently arrested for their heinous crime. Tanya's father, Carl Lee Haley, seeks legal representation from Jake Brigance, a white lawyer known for his easygoing nature. He is worried that the men who raped his daughter may be acquitted due to the deep-seated racism present in the Mississippi Delta area. They discuss a similar case that occurred in the South, in which 4 white teenagers were acquitted of the rape of a black girl. Brigance acknowledges the possibility that the rapists may walk free in this case as well. Carl Lee Haley tracks down the 2 men who brutally raped his daughter, Tanya, and kills them in a public and brazen manner. He waits for them inside the courthouse, where they are due to appear for a hearing, and ambushes them with an automatic rifle, shooting them repeatedly until they are dead, and also is the unintended injury of Deputy Looney, who must have his leg amputated. After the shooting, Carl Lee Haley calmly walks over to the local police, where he confesses to the murders and surrenders himself to the authorities. He is arrested and charged with murder. He tells the police that he killed the men in revenge for what they did to his daughter, and that he does not regret his actions. At first, Jake is hesitant to take on the case. He knows that the community is deeply racist and that the case will likely be controversial and difficult. He is also aware that he has little experience and few resources to mount an effective defense for Carl Lee Haley. However, Jake's secretary, Ethel Twitty, and a civil rights activist named Harry Rex Vonner convince him to take on the case. Ethel is a wise and loyal secretary who sees that this is an opportunity for Jake to prove himself as a lawyer and gain recognition. Harry Rex is an old friend of Jake's and a civil rights lawyer who is also convinced that this case is important for the fight against racism and discrimination in the South. The rape and subsequent act of revenge gain national media attention, and the Ku Klux Klan begins to organize in the area. Freddie Lee Cobb, the brother of one of the rapists, begins making death threats to Brigance and his family and organizes the formation of a Klan chapter in the county. The district attorney, Rufus Buckley, decides to seek the death penalty, and the presiding judge, Omar Noose, denies Brigance a change of venue. During the preparation for the trial, Ellen Rourke, a determined liberal law student from Massachusetts and a member of the ACLU, approaches Brigance to help. Initially hesitant to accept her assistance, he eventually agrees to let her assist with the case. In order to build a strong defense, Brigance seeks assistance from his sleazy divorce lawyer and close friend Harry Rex Vonner. He also turns to longtime liberal activist Lucien Wilbanks, a once great civil rights lawyer who was disbarred for violence on a picket line, for guidance. Jake visits Carl Lee Haley in jail. Jake is initially shocked by the brutal nature of the crime and the trauma that the Haley family has endured. He listens as Carl Lee Haley tells him about the events leading up to the murders and the overwhelming sense of rage and despair that he felt when he learned that his daughter had been raped. He also sees the injustice and discrimination that Carl Lee Haley and his family have been subjected to throughout their lives, and how the legal system has failed them. Jake is moved by Carl Lee Haley's story and decides to continue on the case, despite the challenges and risks that it poses. Tanya Haley, the daughter of Carl Lee Haley, is still recovering from the attack. She is emotionally and physically scarred from the event. Jake begins to gather evidence and build a defense for Carl Lee Haley. He is aware that the case will be difficult and that the community is deeply racist and wants to see Carl Lee Haley convicted. He also knows that the prosecution will do everything in their power to secure a conviction, and that the judge and the jury are likely to be biased against his client. Jake starts by interviewing the family and friends of Carl Lee Haley to gain insight into the man's character and to gather evidence of the discrimination and injustice that he and his family have faced throughout their lives. He also hires an investigator to gather evidence that may help to prove Carl Lee Haley's innocence. However, as Jake and his team begin to gather evidence, they face challenges at every turn. The Klan also begins to target Brigance, assaulting his elderly secretary and her husband, who dies of a heart attack brought on by the assault. The Klan, with a member inside the sheriff's department, sets a cross on fire on Brigance's lawn, causing tension between him and his wife, who blames him for not heeding Carl Lee's warning. The police evacuate Jake's family from their house. Brigance and the police capture one of the Klan members, and they discover a case containing a bomb. Brigance throws the bomb into the air, where it explodes. This event leads Jake to send his wife and young daughter away while the trial continues. As the trial progresses, the KKK march down the streets of Canton and encounter a large group of mostly black protesters outside the courthouse. Chaos erupts as the police lose control of the crowd. A black teenager kills the KKK Grand Dragon with a Molotov cocktail, burning him to death. Brigantz's attraction to Rourke deepens, and they nearly begin an affair before he regains control of himself. He returns home to find that his house has been burned down by arsonists, nearly killing his dog Max in the process. The next morning, the Mississippi National Guard is called in to control the rioting. Brigantz sits on the still-smoking steps of his house, calling for his dog. Harry Rex visits the remains of the Brigantz home and advises Jake to quit the case. Brigantz argues that quitting now would make his sacrifices meaningless. The jury secretly discusses the case in a restaurant, going against the judge's instructions. All but one are inclined to a guilty verdict, and Carl Lee's fate seems sealed. As Brigantz exits the courthouse, Freddie Lee Cobb attempts to shoot him but misses, and the bullet hits a National Guardsman policing the demonstrations, paralyzing him. Rourke is kidnapped by the Klan, beaten, tied to a stake in the wilderness, and left to die in her underwear. She is saved by Tim Nunley, an informant who is also a member of the Klan, known as Mickey Mouse. Out of options, Brigantz visits Carl Lee in his jail cell and advises him to accept a lesser guilty plea. Carl Lee refuses and rejects Brigantz's views on race and justice, pointing out that although Brigantz sees himself as a friend to Carl Lee, he has never visited his home and that our kids will never play together. Carl Lee explains that he chose Brigantz as his attorney because he is his enemy, as Brigantz is white and was thus raised amid the same racial prejudices as the jury members. Carl Lee tells Brigantz to sway the jury by presenting them with whatever argument it would take to get him, Brigantz, to vote for acquittal if he were a member of that jury. Brigantz is able to discredit the state's psychiatrist, Dr. Wilbert Rodeheaver, by exposing his biased testimony. However, Buckley turns the tables by discrediting Brigantz's psychiatrist, Dr. Willard Tyrell Bass, by revealing his prior conviction of statutory rape. Disheartened, Brigantz informs Carl Lee that there is little hope for an acquittal. As the attorneys present their closing arguments, the courtroom is filled with people. Brigantz begins by asking the jury to close their eyes and listen to a story. He describes in slow and painful detail the rape of a young 10-year-old girl, mirroring the story of Tanya's rape. He then poses a question to the jury, asking them to now imagine she's white. This final statement challenges the very nature of the trial, highlighting the reality that within the racist culture of the community where the crime took place, the actions of Haley would not have been questioned in court had the victim been white. This implies that the father's motive in murdering the rapists would have been seen as justified by the public, and there would not have been any prosecution. Brigantz then makes the argument that if the jury can be compelled to spare the life of a white man for a vengeful murder, then they must also be able to do the same for a black man. After deliberation, an African-American child runs out of the courthouse and screams, "He's innocent!" Jubilation ensues amongst the supporters outside. The Klan, enraged, becomes violent again. Sheriff Ozzie Walls arrests Freddie Lee, as well as his own racist deputy. The movie ends with Brigantz bringing his wife and daughter to a family cookout at Carl Lee's house. Carl Lee is surprised and standoffish, but Brigantz explains, "Just thought our kids could play together," and Carl Lee smiles at that.